Order, order. Welcome to this morning's evidence session. We've had this session in the diary for a while, but obviously it's now taking place in the light of the Secretary of State's announcement on the reset of HS2 yesterday, and today we hope to dig further into the details. We welcome Sarah Olney, who is joining us today from the Public Accounts Committee. So please could I ask the witnesses to introduce themselves?
Peter, Lord Hendy of Richmond Hill. I'm the Minister of State for Rail at the Department for Transport.
I'm Mark Wilde. I'm the CEO of HS2 Limited.
I'm Creamer, Director General at DFT, and I'm the SRO for HS2.
And welcome, your first outing in this role,
indeed.
I believe.
Hello.
Thank you. Welcome. So, is the information that was announced yesterday the full reset of the HS2 programme, or what further detail can we expect?
Yeah, well, the reset, the word reset of HS2 is actually a bit more all-encompassing than yesterday. I took this job in December 24, and it was always a 2-year process to reset. So by reset, we actually mean April 27, our objective of a new baseline schedule, a reliable programme of work we can monitor against, a budget, new relationships as best we can get with our supply chain, and finally the improvements to HS2 Limited's capabilities. That's what we mean by reset. Yesterday was the foundation stone of that, the bookends, the sequence of work, the big decisions that need to be taken on technology. So in a lot of ways, yesterday's announcement is the foundation stone of the reset that we aim to conclude in April 27.
Okay. Right. So how much certainty do you have about the revised costs that were announced yesterday, now rising from between 87.7 billion and 102.7 billion in 2025 prices?
Yeah, so first of all, let's just acknowledge what bad news this is. You know, we just got to acknowledge that from the budget set in April 2020, the baseline then was something called 7.1, just for reference, and that budget was 43 billion pounds. The numbers we have doubled that, so the budget's doubled in 5 years. Let's just acknowledge this is terrible news, and we have to really think about the reasons for that in setting the new baseline. The reasons I'm very confident that these bookends of time and cost are robust and will lead to what you might say a more detailed programme of work for April 27 are three distinct reasons. Firstly, we've taken a whole year. I'm very grateful actually to the department and for the government to have given me the time and space to go through this job with a fine-tooth comb. So we've really been through every part of this job, working out the sequence of work, gaps in work that we're missing. So number one, we've thoroughly analysed where we are. Number two, we have had the benefit that they didn't have in 2020 of demonstrated performance. So after 5 years of civil engineering, I know how much it costs to move a cubic metre of earth. So we've really had the benefit of demonstrated performances. Where we've got tendered prices, we've also checked that against other projects such as the Elizabeth Line or London Bridge. So we've benchmarked. And the third element where I'm really very, very confident, we spent the past year, just as we did with Crossrail and Elizabeth Line, putting everything into the right sequence. So for those reasons, I am very confident that we've got the right bookends, as is described. We've also put this through a very, very thorough assurance. Previously, and I think a good learning, I know this committee is very interested in lessons learned, one of the big improvements I think we've made this time is to have a smaller number of assurance layers, but deeper and with greater expertise. And I'm not here to criticise what was done in 2020. I wasn't here. What I do know is that these ranges have been subject to the most detailed scrutiny from people who really know how to build these projects. For those reasons, I really do think these are robust.
Okay, so I mean, the estimate of the likely cost is a heck of an increase on what we've had before. But What, apart from inflation, obviously, what are the main elements of these increased costs, and what is and is not included in the figures 87 to 102, rolling stock, redeveloping Euston, signalling, etc.?
So first of all, what are these numbers? And inflation can be quite a confusing topic. These are what's termed a mixed price base, which means they are in today's prices going forward, but they cater for all of the money that we've spent, which clearly have all been at different times and different inflation bases. Dean might speak in a minute after I've summarised the increases in the approach we're going to take to inflation. Dean could do that. So since the notice to proceed, the increase is in kind of 2/3. 1/3 of it is inflation. So we've had £16.6 billion of inflation in 5 years. And to be fair to everybody who's associated with this programme, the war in Ukraine was clearly very unexpected. So 1/3 of the increase, £16 billion, comes from inflation, which legitimately I think would have been very difficult to predict. The other 2/3, though, are worth dwelling on, and they're in 3 categories. We've had underestimation at the beginning, we've had inefficiency in delivery, and we found in my work gaps in work that was omitted in the original estimate that should have been included. And that adds up to 2/3 of the increase. And to anticipate the next question, the root cause of that really goes down to one singular root cause, that this project started on site with immaturity of design. And obviously in your private lives and in other projects you'll scrutinise, if you start a project of this magnitude with immature design, with contracts that put the balance of risk on the government and the arm's length body, and without the appropriate consenting, you are bound to get into great problems as you get into delivery. So 2/3 of the increase are all really due to the decision to start too early. I might invite Dean to speak about how we're going to treat inflation going forward.
Thanks, Mark. So arriving at the project, the first question I asked on the ranges is, what's not included? What are the assumptions and exclusions? The things that are outside of the range, the big one is inflation. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. The other things are, if you like, kind of what we might term black swan events. So the principle being everything that ought to be under HS2's control is within those ranges. On inflation itself, so the decision we've taken, and we've seen from events in the Middle East this year, and as Mark said, on the huge increase in inflation over the last few years, betting on inflation is a very difficult and unwise thing to do. So we've agreed with the Treasury that we will treat inflation separately, and we will uprate it every 2 years with each spending review from this point on.
Okay, so the revised costs have a range of 15 billion. So what's the rationale for that range?
Oh, I should have mentioned, Chair, you asked a question about what it includes. Just to be clear, these costs include everything. You know, some elements like Euston are at a different level of maturity, but everything's included from Euston to Handsacre Junction to Birmingham Curzon Street. It excludes what was known as Phase 2A, 2B, those works. But in the context of what you know as Phase 1, everything is in. The signalling, the rolling stock, Euston, everything is in. Why is the range so big? Well, I think a big learning from Crossrail and evidence in the James Stewart review, dealing with things in the future that are uncertain, best practice is to use a range. So how we've arrived at the range is we've created what the Minister and Secretary of State have termed a challenging ambition. The cost and time that would be really ambitious, realistic but ambitious, and that's what I should be charged with. But around that challenging ambition, there's a range of uncertainty. So these are risk provisions, headwinds, tailwinds. And as we sit here today, there is still a great deal of uncertainty in this programme. The civil engineering is 60 to 70% complete, but it's highly weather dependent. So I clearly can't anticipate what the level of rainfall will be, which greatly affects productivity. There are other uncertainties as well, productivity. So the range is quite broad, 3 years of time and £15 billion of money. But the objective is that as we retire these and intervene into these risks, we narrow the range. And clearly my objective, just to be very clear, is to get to that challenging ambition of the front end of the ranges. But I think mistakes projects have made in the past, including Crossrail, was becoming hostage to fortune of unrealistic, forward-leaning dates. Much better to be transparent that there is a range of uncertainty and then progressively work to retire risks to narrow the range. And I believe we are following the best practice of major programme delivery in doing that.
If I might,
Yes,
Mark mentioned Euston. So when we talk about Euston, just to be really explicit, we mean the HS2 station into Euston and the associated upgrades to the London Underground, not work that we would do on the conventional station.
Okay, and we're coming on to Euston later. So, in terms of that range of estimation, first of all, you mentioned contingency. How much of that is contingency, which one always needs, and whether that it's the same thing or different is what is your risk assessment in terms of future inflation and rising construction costs built into that, or could that add further? So just trying to understand, how much of your range is plannable and how much you're allowing for externalities and plus contingency.
Let me talk about the contingency, and maybe Dean, you could talk about how we're going to treat inflation in the future. I might frame it, if I could, just a slightly different way, that in April 27, 1 year from today, we aim to have a very reliable, high-fidelity baseline schedule. That baseline schedule will have all the things you'd expect: risk provisions, backed off with supply chain agreements, management reserve contingencies that the department would hold and would allocate to me. We're just simply not in that position. The thing I found when I arrived in this job was the programme had become completely uncoordinated and HS2 really didn't have control. So the reason I mention that is the process we're going through is to get into a position in April 27 when matters of reserve and contingency come under normal controls. Right now, what we're doing right now is making sure that we form that baseline, and while we're doing that, we're really very, very productive and pushing very hard actually in the field. So to answer your question specifically, the matters of contingency and risk are part of the baselining process over the next 6 months. But the range, the bookends, the baseline will sit within it. So I hope this is clear that I can't exactly answer you about what the contingency is, because that's the process of baselining over the next 6 weeks. We are clear, though, what the big drivers of risk are, and they are the things I've mentioned: productivity, the extent of our supply chains, incentivization, the weather. So we're clear on what the risk provisions are, but the baselining process will get to the contingency.
Okay, and Lawrence is going to ask you a more specific question on that.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. Just to follow up on trying to quantify uncertainty, in the past there have been various attempts to put a P number, either P50, P95, on those estimates. For that future spend within those ranges announced yesterday, is there a P number attached to them, and can that be shared?
Yeah, so the bookends, they don't really have a P number, but they're broad enough to be confident that when the baseline is formed with the P50 and P80, they'll sit comfortably within it. So the bookends certainly don't cater for very dramatic, what are termed black swan events. Nobody could cater for that. But they do cater for the normal project risks that will occur. I think if we try to cater for very extreme events, the range would become so broad it would be meaningless. So I couldn't put a P number on the bookends, but they are sufficient for the P50 and P80 to sit within. And to your point, the prize is, in April 27, a P50 and a P80, which allows the government and the Department and Treasury to allocate the correct budget to me and also retain some risks. Dean?
Well, I think it's worth saying that as Mark said at the beginning, the reset isn't complete with the ranges announced. The ranges are, if you like, Mark's top-down assessment, albeit very very clearly assured. But what happens now is the ranges are announced. That gives us a top-down view. In the autumn, Mark will do his first baseline, and that is, if you like, the bottom-up view of all the lines. So you move from a few thousand lines to tens of thousands of lines of data, and then a final version of that will be produced for April. And that's the point where we think that we would come out of reset and then move into what we'd call a normal sponsorship of the programme.
That's helpful, thank you.
And in terms of these revised cost estimates, what independent oversight have you had or are you using to assure yourselves, the DfT, and ultimately the taxpayer, that it's going to go right from now on?
This was a key objective in this work, was not simply to have very robust, well thought through structure of the estimates in the engineering, but to make sure they would stand up to scrutiny. So we've applied a 3 levels of defence approach. First level of defence is at the working level. Every piece of work has been checked by an independent peer group. So if we've done an estimate for Curzon Street Station, at level 1 level of defence, we've had a completely separate team check it. And we've employed many new estimators, quantity surveyors to do independent checking. At level 2 of defence, we've had a completely independent group of professional services people checking the processes being followed. And I think the 3rd level of defence, a really very expert independent panel, has done very thorough work. And to give the committee some confidence, the reason it's taking me to this point, 15 months since I started, we've had many iterations. We simply haven't got through the assurance easily. Every iteration, the SRO, the previous SRO, Alan Over, the new SRO, Dean, we've worked really well together, and generally everything we've done has taken 2 or 3 goes in iterations. Now that should give you great confidence. The 3 very thorough levels of defence, a very serious approach. We've also in the government space adopted the Office of Value for Money recommendations of a single major programmes decision panel with NISTA, the Cabinet Office and Treasury. It's been a genuine one-team approach, but very thorough. And that's why it's taken 15 months to get to the bookends. That should give us all a lot of confidence that they're very robust.
And these panels, or the panel, they're independent people in other jobs giving of their time, presumably paid somehow. It's not an organisation or a...
in level 3, independent individual people with great experience of doing it. High-speed rail, complications all around the world. Level 2, we have used professional services companies, but completely independent.
Right.
At level 1, peer to peer, these are individual people.
Okay. And is this process going to continue going forward and through the life of the project?
Yeah, one of my reflections is one of the big mistakes in Crossrail, and I believe an area we could improve in HS2 is once baselines are struck, this ongoing scrutiny and transparency is really essential, and that's certainly my commitment. I know it's the expectation of the SRO and the government, and it's a mistake I think Crossrail and HS2 made, that the assurance has to be progressive rather than just a singular event.
If it's okay, Chair, I'd make 2 observations on that. One is we've got to the point now where actually if we are proposing a new piece of work, the first question we're asking the department is, has it been through that LOD 3 process, that independent checking? And that checking also it also includes wider government. So the approach we're taking is not looking at this just through a DfT lens, but actually how we lever the wider skills across government. And so NISTA have a place on that LOD 3 panel as well. So we're bringing in expertise from across government and the Cabinet Office and more widely as well.
And was that level of scrutiny not done in the past?
I mean, I'd just say, you would, anybody listening to this would be rightly horrified. When I turned up in this job, The first time I met Dean's predecessor and then the most senior person in HS2, they both turned up in the room with a sheet of paper, none of which numbers agreed with each other, and there was no substance to certainly the HS2 numbers. I think the department at that stage wasn't as well informed as it certainly is now, but it was impossible to judge. I couldn't take the pieces of paper. It was not clear to me that there was any real information there backed by anybody. And this is why you're hearing, you know, the processes that Mark is describing. Sadly, he's been through them twice with Crossrail and now with HS2, but this is a disastrous place to be with a project at this stage. So, you know, I think we do believe, I've been very quiet because we've been through all this, as has the Secretary of State and the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. We're confident of this process. But you wouldn't half have liked this process to have started quite a long time ago, wouldn't you?
Well, that plus getting the design right at the from the start, yeah, fairly significant. Okay, thank you very much. Now, Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Because we're British, let's talk about the weather very briefly, Mark. You mentioned, you know, how the weather might impact on the civils work. So if this was a one-year project, I would really understand that, but it's not going to be complete till 2039. Surely over that period of time, the weather is broadly predictable. So are you just hiding behind that?
Question, let me explain. So first of all, the range is 2036 to 39, and certainly my ambition is to get
so pessimistic,
closer to the 36. Yeah, the weather. So let's just describe the next 4 years are actually pivotal in this programme. Between Old Oak Common and Curzon Street, we need to get the civil engineering done. So by 2029, my ambition is that we complete the civil engineering and we start laying the track. We only do our civil engineering between March and November. So the question is, can we get the civil engineering done in 3 earthwork seasons? If we have a deluge in one of those years, it's actually very difficult for the civil engineers to safely complete their work.
So in your current programme, you've not got, in that period, you've not got contingency for one deluge, as you put it, one wet period?
Yeah, so a good question from the Chair about risk. So in the range, how do you have a 3-year range? Where one of the big drivers of the 3-year range is, do we need 3, 4, 5 years to complete the civil engineering? The minimum is 3, that's my objective. We do everything we can. But if we did have a really difficult summer of deluge of rain, we might need another year. So one of the big variances we have is, can we get the civil engineering done by 2029, which is the objective. If it delays, the thing we're not going to do is where Crossrail got into trouble, where they started to do the systems in parallel with the civil engineering, 2 people working on the same thing at once. So we've taken a principal decision here to complete the civil engineer before we start laying the track, a clean handover, which means the weather, earthwork seasons, is quite a determinant in the next 3 years.
Okay, and in inflation, if we look at, so when you talked about, I think, 16 billion inflation, the cost of inflation, you based that at 2020, but of course the project started way back in 2009, construction work started in 2017, where inflation was 4%, and by 2021 inflation was almost 0. So I'm guessing there was a real benefit in terms of inflation there.
Well, yes, but I've got a briefing in here. We've also had hyperinflation of, I think the inflation in this peaked at 14.7%.
Yeah. So of that 16, how much of that is unexpected inflation, and how much did you have baselined in? Because that's the total figure, isn't it? You're always going to be able to
I could give you a precise briefing on it, but at least half of the inflation we've seen is what you might term hyperinflation that occurred. Because if you think about the Ukraine war, one of the first things terribly that happened in the Ukraine war was the inflation of Mariupol. It's where all the steel of HS2 was coming from. So it's not the headline. We've had hyperinflation in commodities. So one of the things that nobody could have anticipated is the loss of the steel capacity from Mariupol, creating 20-30% inflation on steel. So broadly, right up to date, the 43 billion we've spent includes periods of low inflation and hyperinflation. We are kind of where we are.
And that inflation number you quoted there, 16%, that's the inflation to the project rather than the the inflation we see in the wider economy.
So the project.
Yeah, okay, yeah, project.
And Mark, it's probably worth saying that on that, the HS2 spend increased significantly from 2020 as well. So part of the reason why it's so back-ended is because that ramp-up of spend happened from 2020 and from that notice to proceed.
Should have started sooner, is the message. Okay, perhaps not. The so when I first became an MP, I knew about HS2 that wasn't going particularly smoothly, but I was shocked that we heard that there was no end date, we didn't know what the price was going to be. And then Heidi came along and said we did not even have an accurate, I think it was Heidi that came along, we didn't even have an accurate assessment of how much work had been completed. That's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible.
Well, I would say two things. Can I just put it out there that we've got 34,000 brilliant people working on this project.
Yeah.
Let's just acknowledge, it's easy for me to talk about the weather, but they're the people actually doing it. I'm very proud actually of my own team and the construction industry, but there is a reality that we'd lost control of the programme. And in that process of losing control, we also lost sight of exactly what we've done. One thing we did in the past year was a very, very thorough measurement of what we've done. We're in the process of repeating that now. Yeah. When we get to the baseline, you will not need to ask me that question, because as you would all appreciate, with the baseline, at the press of a button, I could tell you precisely where I'm at. So the process of the programme falling out of sequence also led, as the Minister said, that HS2 Limited had lost sight of how much it had done. Look, I can't talk about the past, but I do know we have a grip now, and I know precisely where we are on our 350 sites. And the objective of a baseline is to make that enduring, so you don't need me to be checking that. It's an enduring thing.
Okay, and so we know what's been done, and we know that it's of the quality that we need. Okay.
Yeah, the quality, on a positive about HS2, as you will all evidence if you travel around and look at the infrastructure, the quality of our engineering is exceptional. We really have not had significant quality problems. There are some quality issues that we deal with as they come up, but generally the quality of the civil engineering has been of an exceptional quality. The safety is not flawless, but we're on a positive trend with safety. Got more to do, of course, but we've actually got really hard-working people at the highest quality. The problem here was loss of control and great inefficiency, which is more about control than the quality of the work, I think.
Yeah, I think we've seen some of that work, and I met the staff who were fantastic when we were on the trip there. Last question, Chair. So we're 13 years away, perhaps, from me being able to buy my first ticket on the thing. Hindsight's powerful. I mean, if you were starting the project today, completely afresh today, do you think you could complete it by 2039? And would it be cheaper if you're starting today?
I don't know. The project was, the notice of proceed was to be a 10-year project for £43 billion. That has proven to be not tenable. I really couldn't answer.
Was it possible though? Was it possible?
I don't know. Certainly it happens in if you go to France, go to Spain, they do projects of this scale in faster time. I don't know, but I could say the conditions that would be needed to even attempt it would be to get design maturity to the level that you would need. And if you go to France and people say, well, how can the French build Tour Bordeaux in 6 years for 8 billion? Generally, they've done it because they've got the consenting, the design, the supply chain all lined up. The classic go slow, as James Stewart said, go slow to go fast. So it might have been possible, but the conditions are more interesting, I think.
And you would have had a different specification. So one of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about this morning is that the specification of this has some exceptional features which you would not seek to replicate again, and maybe with hindsight should not have been there in the first place.
Well, and the whole point of the Lovegrove report that was released yesterday is learning the lessons from HS2 to make sure that future infrastructure projects don't go the same way, I guess. Right, okay, let's move on to Elsie.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for giving evidence to us today. We know that the entry into service date of Old Oak Common to Curzon Street could now be as late as 2039 and from Euston as late as 2043. For taxpayers, so our constituents, who've watched this saga play out for over a decade already, they're obviously really clear that we need to see some progress made. What assurances, so in terms of extra time that will now be needed for construction and for testing railway systems, as you mentioned, what assurances can you give to taxpayers today? Mark, I don't know if you want to take that question.
Yes, I mean, well, first of all, I would say, you know, I really feel the responsibility of this. You know, I'm like everybody, I understand the government and taxpayers' money really counts, and there's a huge amount of taxpayers' money to spend here. So firstly I would say is we understand the responsibility, and I'm sure Dean would join me in that. The baseline schedule will provide the opportunity for people to do this project in a sort of sequence way where people aren't overlapping and causing great inefficiency. So I know I'm promising jam tomorrow, but I'm convinced that the bookends of time we've created here are robust. The baseline will fit within it, and once we have a baseline schedule, we will manage this project in an orderly, transparent way. The two things that underpin it that are necessary to achieve the baseline are correcting the organisational capabilities of HS2. We've made a lot of progress on bringing in new senior people with experience. Also in our supply chain. I've been very pleased actually that our supply chain joint venture partners, there's more to do and we're in discussions with them right now, but they need to lean into it as well. So the baseline schedule is necessary but not sufficient. To answer your question, it'll need HS2 Limited to have the right capability and the supply chain to lean into it. Both of those things I believe will happen. So I'm selling you something in the future, but it's all predicated on a schedule that is reliable.
I think if I may, I might say as well that some very clear instructions I've had in starting this job is in supporting Mark. First of all, this principle that we deliver as quickly as we can for the lowest reasonable cost runs through all of the decisions that we now take. There is a second guiding principle as well, which is about making sure that we don't block off the ability to get trains beyond Birmingham in the longer term. And the third element of it is also to make sure that we deal with the issues now. I'm sure we'll talk about the speed issue, but that is an example in my view following on from the Lovegrove recommendations. That is where you see that you are holding risk further down the chain, that you deal with them sooner rather than later, and you bring them to light and give particularly ministers and the programme the opportunity to mitigate it sooner rather than later, rather than waiting until it becomes an issue.
And if I may, I think the taxpayers, ought to be furious, as we are, that we're in this position. But they would expect the government to be leaning into this and understanding exactly what's going on. And the reason I'm quiet here, at least for the moment, is because actually the Secretary of State and I and the Chief Secretary have been right through this with these people, and we have to sit next to them and see this project carried out for the satisfaction of taxpayers and ultimately for passengers. We can't leave them to it in a way that clearly has been done in the past.
And a slightly separate question, but as a Greater Manchester MP, I am going to ask this. Do you have a message for taxpayers or my constituents or people who will no longer directly benefit from HS2 after the cancellation of the northern leg? So,
three answers, I think. Firstly, the intention is that trains using that part of HS2, which is being constructed now, will also use the West Coast Main Line and serve Manchester, Liverpool and other places to the north. That's always been part of the scheme, and it still will be part of the scheme, and there'll be some benefits, real benefits in journey time about that. Secondly, the government has said it will still consider what capacity is needed north of Handsacre, because the West Coast Main Line is still quite full up there, and it will only get fuller. But that has to be, we've got to fix this first, and everybody would expect us to. And thirdly, in respect of east-west travel across the Pennines, we are absolutely determined that the lessons of this are learnt for Northern Powerhouse Rail. I think there's some good provenance. Transpennine Upgrade, which is the project that nobody wants to discuss because it's on time and budget, is being carried out very differently on an operating railway. So I think those are three decent messages for everybody in the Midlands and the north of England. And we haven't forgotten that one of the intentions was better train services to the north and the northwest in Scotland.
And this committee has actually been to see the Transpennine, some of the work on the Transpennine route upgrade. It looks great to me, on time and on budget, as you say. So, yeah, good to get an opportunity to emphasise that. Moving on slightly, onto a bit more on timescales, but on cost. Mr Wilde, you have said that this will be the last reset before the project is finished. The Secretary of State said herself in the Commons Chamber yesterday that costs could rise to up to almost 103 billion, up from just under 33 billion in 2011. What plans do you have in place if your revised cost schedule and timescales end up being blown off course again?
Well, in terms of how do we avoid getting to the top end of that range? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, so the one of my worries about ranges is that people automatically think, well, this road is heading to the outer range. So we really must bear down to get to the front end of that range. The key is, like in everything, is to intervene today in risks that will appear in the future. So I've mentioned probably the biggest one, which is we really do want to see that transition from civil engineering to track laying in 2029. Because to your point, once the track starts to be laid and the civil engineers are off the park, it becomes quite repeatable. Becomes a factory environment. And the key then is to do everything in the right sequence, minimise the technological development that we need. But I'm sure we'll come to the scope in the speed and the technology. We've made decisions now that make this a very standard and straightforward railway to build. It's still a very great railway, very fast, very modern, one of the best in Europe, but it's standard. So the key is for me to keep to the early part of these ranges in the next 4 years, really, really focus on productivity and get the civil engineering done and get the track started. Because once the system engineers start and we've minimised the technological horizon, it should be a relatively straightforward and sequential job to get the railway open. If that delays, we get problems, because if the civil engineers delay, the system engineers are waiting. So the prize actually, the effort is in the next 3 to 4 years, and I'm sure this committee will scrutinise that carefully. But if people want to keep one thing in mind, it is end of civils in 29, start of track in 29. That's a stretching target, and that's what we're going to really focus people on. And if that happens, you start to get to the early parts of these ranges. It really is all about the transition of civils to systems.
Just finally from me, what makes this reset different to previous attempts to recalibrate the programme? And if I may ask, is there anything specific, or what in particular would you point to directly that you've changed since you were appointed in 2024?
I think, first of all, I wouldn't take any credit personally. I think it's been a genuine team effort. I don't take any personal credit. It's I've felt nothing but supported, and the breakthrough, I think, is of us all working together and all in alignment, which I know the Minister, when I took this job, was particularly keen that we did, and we've achieved that. So alignment, I think, is the breakthrough. The reason it should give people confidence is we've been through this before. We followed almost exactly the process we've done in Crossrail. Interestingly, the same methodology was used in the Transpennine, which is holding its baseline schedule, I believe. So we're using the right method, and we're aligned in the government and the department. Those should give everybody a lot of confidence. I have a call this afternoon with all the CEOs of all the supply chain providing me, and I can guarantee to you the whole supply chain is behind this project. So that alignment is the thing that I think is different. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's both of yours. Excellent. Thank you. Jacob.
Thank you. Morning. This question's for Mark. You've obviously told us today that prior to your appointment, it was a project that was uncoordinated and had lost control, and you'd previously told us that HS2 Limited was not set up to manage delivery. So what steps have you taken to restructure the organisation so that it is one that prioritises delivery?
Yeah, I think let's just acknowledge, like I say, I'm really proud of my team. I couldn't have asked any more from the folks at HS2 Limited. Great people, actually. But HS2 Limited was really designed for a different purpose. It was designed to be an enterprise for many high-speed rail projects. It was developing projects to Manchester and Eastern Lake to Leeds. So HS2 Limited was really an interesting organisation, but not one that was what you might say the prime system integrator of one single project. So the big pivot for HS2 Limited is to really focus on the phase 1 job. We still have people working in my organisation on phase 2, the potential phase 2, 2B. They all work actually more directly for Dean. My focus is singularly phase 1. That's a very, very large change in HS2. We've really focused on commercial capability. We have recreated what we'd lost, which was a commercial function in HS2. People might be surprised about that, but we are the biggest construction project in the country, one of the biggest in Europe, and we've got to have good commercial capability. Appointed Morag Stewart from the new hospital programme as our new Chief Commercial Officer, and we are rebuilding that whole area. We also fundamentally are rebalancing the organisation. The organisation was too heavy in the centre and too light in the field. It was unbalanced. Too many roles in the centre that created a degree of bureaucracy. Nobody's fault. In fact, quite frustrating for people in HS2 to work in that context. We've completely rebalanced that. We've moved all of the effort to the tip of the spear. 30,000 colleagues working out there in the field. So this should give you confidence that we are shifting the centre of gravity in HS2 Limited from an enterprise to one that's building a strategic asset for national rail. And the other big change that I know the Minister is very keen to see is we see ourselves as part of national rail, of creating an asset for the future of GBR, the department, not an enterprise that's somewhat separate. Now, this is a work in progress, and probably the biggest task I have is to change the capability of HS2 Limited. It might be the singular biggest task I have. The good news is the people of HS2 are really behind this. It just takes a bit of time to get the right capability and skills. The positives are we've recruited so many good young folks in HS2 Limited, apprenticeships, graduates, and don't lose sight of the next 15 years. We are creating the next generation that people will go and build major programs for GBR. So it's a work in progress. I hope I've given you some flavour there, but I understand it's probably my number one job, and look forward to sharing the journey with you.
And if I might add, the government has changed the board. We've got a new chair, Mike Brown, who has worked with Mark before on finishing off Crossrail, now the Elizabeth line, and the board has been through significant change as well, because we're expecting the board to supervise this organisation in the construction that Mark is talking about, which is an organisation wholly focused to delivering this project.
On the side question, at committee the other week we were told that some of the staff in HS2 are going to be tasked with working on Northern Powerhouse Rail. Is there the capacity there?
There is a small but very, very capable team in HS2 Limited, a national capability, people who deal with detailed planning and hybrid builds, a very small team, less than 100 that have existed. They're in my organisation for what you might term bread and rations, but they're under the direct control of Dean's organisation.
But their work is not to the detriment of the main work that he's describing, which is managing this project properly, and nor could it be.
And while we're talking about capacity, is there the capacity in the department to provide the not just oversight but expert oversight of the programme? One of the weaknesses that was highlighted in the Stewart Review, whilst not having more bean counters in the department than there are in HS2.
Yes, and that's something I'm looking very closely at, and I'm very mindful of those lessons. I think there are three things that a really good sponsor team does, in my view. The first is you need to manage the money and make sure the financial incentives in the system are right. You need to make sure the governance works and that decisions are taken at the right time in the right places and that information is reported in the right way. But third, and I think this is a really crucial bit for me, is you need to be able to use the convening power of government when things go wrong, when you find challenges, to bring people together to fix problems, to solve problems. Now, when I look at our team, what we've done certainly over the last couple of months and before that is think about, have we got the right balance of kind of generalist policy skills which are needed in terms of things like managing bills, managing the kind of the government side of things, but then also the technical expertise. Previously, one of the criticisms I think came up in the Stewart review was there was too much assurance outside but not enough embedded. And so what we've done over recent months is move to embed those expert skills into my team. I have a new programme director as well who is a full-time programme director from outside, who's a quantity surveyor by background. But we are building what is effectively a multidisciplinary team in the department that can cover all of the capability that we need. But that is the same with Mark. That will be a process that we go through over the course of the reset.
And so we've sort of morphed from capacity into oversight. Ollie, was there anything else you wanted to pick up on this area of oversight?
Yeah.
Everything being covered. Right, okay, thank you. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Wild, you've been in post now for a year and a half. How has the relationship between HS2 Limited and the Department for Transport on the one hand and the Treasury on the other changed during that time?
Well, one thing I observed when I took this job, and obviously James Stewart picked it up, was the sort of vulcanisation between the department and the HS2 position. Now that was untenable. To run any project of this size, alignment of the sponsor and the delivery authority is absolutely crucial. They've got different roles, different perspectives, but if that alignment isn't there, things get unravelled quickly. So when I walked through the door, there was already work in place, to be fair, to bring it together. The previous chair, Sir John Thompson, I think, had done a very good job with the previous SRO, Alan Over, to try to bridge this divide. But certainly in my perspective, from day one here, I felt very aligned. I formed a very close relationship with the previous SRO. I've continued that with the current SRO. I think we understand our roles are different, but if we've got disagreements, we duke it out and we come to a common position. Treasury, one thing that I've been very pleased about has been the extent of trilateral relationships between the arm's length body, the department and Treasury. And I'm very confident that we are completely aligned. There's no bit of information that the three parties don't see concurrently and together. And I think that's the breakthrough, that there is every piece of information is the same that all three parties share. Everybody's got their different role, but I think we're set up in a very good position. And I couldn't have asked for more, and I think we are in good alignment. I'm sure Dean would agree with that. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, that needs to be supervised by ministers as well. So the relatively far more frequent meeting of the ministerial task force, which is the Secretary of State, Chief Secretary, and me with HS2 and the department, NISTA and other experts, is also crucially important. We all have to show that we've got the information and that we're capable of managing it and having adult conversations about where this is going. And I think that Mark is describing a much better process now, but it must be supervised by ministers, and certainly the Secretary of State and I regard it as one of our principal jobs to make sure that collaborative level is within government as well as with HS2 and the department.
And the ministerial task force previously, before the general election, I think I'm right in saying met only 4 times in 3 years. What is the frequency of meetings now, and what tangibly comes out of those meetings?
I think we've had 5 now, 4, 5.
2 since I have arrived. All of the decisions now all the significant decisions taken now on the programme, strategic decisions, go through the ministerial task force. We've had 2 since January, and we'll expect to have another one in the summer as well. So, I mean, the purpose is it's not about throwing everything. The risk is escalating everything up to ministers. Actually, that wouldn't be the right thing to do. It's about getting the right balance, that there is the proper strategic oversight, the proper grip on the wider programme. What I would say is I was quite anxious coming in, having read the James Stewart review, about what I'd find in terms of the relationship. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised at how good the relationship was between my predecessor and the company. And I think part of that is, as Mark says, there's a principle, if you like, of radical transparency between the department now and the company. I think that's really important. But if I was on your side, I'd say that's fine, but show me in terms of how you're working, how does that play out? And Mark's senior team and mine sit together every week. We come together and we talk about all the issues between us. We work those through. I probably see Mark 6 or 7 times a week, probably more than he wants. But from my perspective, there is this principle about integration. So you integrate not just at the political level, but at the senior executive level, and then our teams between us. And I think this is part of the next phase for us, is making sure that further down the chain, then our teams are as integrated as we are now at the strategic level. And that is, as I say, that's part of the next stage for us in Reset.
So the most recent set of estimates announced yesterday, is that an example of the kind of decision that went to the task force? So we have DFT and HMT aligned on that range of estimates.
Absolutely. And when we discuss that, as when we discuss other things, we hear from Mark, we hear from the chair of HS2, we hear from Dean, we hear from NISTA, we hear from Treasury officials. It's chaired by the Secretary of State, and it's rigorous in terms of everybody understanding the decisions that have been taken, what the risks are of doing it. Because actually we need to show at ministerial level that we're as joined up as they are at this delivery level.
And finally, in this section from me, Chair, one of the weaknesses highlighted in the Lovegrove report was in the past a lack of an effective shareholder voice in the board, or perhaps to put it in different language, taxpayer voice being represented in those discussions. Is there a more assertive approach now from those DFT and HMT representatives on the board?
Oh, yes.
So in addition to the ministerial task force, we also have we've instituted James Stewart's recommendation for a shareholder board, which is chaired by the permanent secretary, but includes then a number of non-executive directors whose job is to challenge us on the programme. And in fact, I'm pleased to say James Stewart has agreed. The Secretary of State asked James Stewart to join that board to make sure that we're not just ticking the box of have we completed these recommendations, but actually we're living the spirit of those values too. So from my perspective, we are actively looking to learn that lesson and to, as I say, we've started that board already.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Scott.
Thank you. So I was impressed with what Heidi said yesterday. She said she was going to remove the gold plating from the project, which is a great line, isn't it? Because people are concerned about the money that's been spent on the project and they want good value from it. But the main headline from that seems to be that we're going to design things as intended, but the trains are going to run slower. That seems a bit odd, doesn't it?
Well, the history of this project, many books will be written, but fundamentally, they are being written now.
Some you've written just now by yourself.
but look, one of the extraordinary things is that this was planned to be faster than any other high-speed railway. The most astonishing thing was that it was predicated on automatic train operation for a system that has not yet been invented for a railway that might have been delivered in the eyes of those who first thought about it about now, and there's no signalling system. And actually, as Mark said earlier, it is particularly extraordinary because the country's already built a high-speed railway, which is built to more or less to European standards. It's signalled with standard signalling system, and HS1 works pretty well. So I think that Heidi's description of it as taking away the gold plating is absolutely right. The journey time calculation of an additional 3 minutes is frankly neither here nor there. But what we are talking about is getting a specification for the end delivery of this, which has the least risk possible, which must be right, actually.
My understanding is we still deliver an infrastructure to the faster speed.
Yep.
I mean, so there's no cost saving there, is there?
Yeah, so the infrastructure, the civil engineering, the bed that holds the track, we've really passed the point where any change would make any sense. In fact, if we made any change to the civil engineering, it would cost us more money. So we're better getting the civil engineering built.
You said you've got 4 years worth of work ahead of you.
Yes, well, but we've been gone for 5, and we've now got to 80 or 90% design. So to change the
You
design,
said you've got a fantastic relationship with your supply chain.
yeah.
They've already made lots of money out of this project. Surely they'd get round the table with you and think, how can we save the taxpayers some money?
It's really in the. It's a fair question, but it's really in the engineering. We've got nearly 90% of the design complete. That design is for the higher speeds. We're about to start prototyping the track, which is a factory environment. So the civil engineering, the track, we're better just getting that done to the spec.
Mm-hmm.
The saving is in the design and testing and commissioning and operational proving. That, as we found in the Elizabeth line, novelty, you do not want to be the first person in the world trying to implement something, developing technology from scratch. We just simply shouldn't be in that game. And to your point about it being slower, it's actually not a slow train. We're converging this with the fastest trains in Japan and France. We're just simply converging the technology, which will de-risk the end of this project. But the civil engineering, we're better getting it done. To your point, there's only 3 years left.
So that this £100 billion project, how much is this going to save then? It's going to reduce your commissioning costs. How much is that going to save us?
Well, we've estimated it to be about £2.5 billion in a year, but it's much more than that, because if you take a big step back, it is about the cost saving and the time saving, but it isn't guaranteed we ever could have delivered it. So it is as much as reduction of risk, getting to the early parts of these ranges, but it's also retiring a downside risk that we never would have got there, which of course, for readers, I'm sure Peter will remember the Jubilee line in the 90s, West Coast Main Line in the early 2000s. We have seen technological signalling failures here before. This is not the project to take a risk on. And the technology we're creating still gives you all of the capacity opportunities in the future. It does, of course, affect some benefits about how they're calculated in the business case, which I'm sure Dean could speak to. But this is the sensible thing to do.
So, I mean, I don't want to get into the detail of signalling, but we're going for slower trains and cheaper signals. We're still going to get the frequency and capacity of trains, so we're still going to get that part of the value.
Yeah, we're going, if I could say, we're going for a fast train, one of the fastest in Europe, and we're going for standard technology and signalling. The other advantage of standard signalling technology is it's convergent with what Network Rail and GBR will do in the future. So it gives you great opportunities as a country. Instead of having two variants of something, you have convergence.
Will they give us the frequency, just to go back to that point?
Yes.
So it's still 3 trains per hour in the opening phase that Mark describes, and then it is up to 10 trains per hour once the trains move beyond Handsacre. And so the number of trains in that sense does not change. If you like, the trade-off is the notional, depending on whether you think you could have achieved 360, the notional economic benefits associated with those 3 minutes.
So I was going to ask about that. Well, I don't want to make assumptions, but I assume at the start of this project an economic benefit was attached to that faster train speed.
Yes.
So have you quantified the economic loss? So is there a value on that?
Yes. So our expectation is that even accounting for that economic value, you've also got to then factor in the potential to open the railway at least a year early. There is also the other downside is there are some more potential operational costs, but those are then offset by a reduction in energy that you will need to run at slower speed. And so our view is there are some cost savings there are time savings, and then there is a big saving in the potential of risk at the end. And collectively, we don't think it will make a big difference to the overall value for money, but we think it will be a big reduction in the amount of risk that the programme is carrying. And what I would say is we will update that value for money assessment as part of our business case later in the year.
So apologies for my cynicism. It won't make a big difference to value for money. It sounds like it's going to be poorer value for money.
No, it's not poorer value for money. I'll be explicit, because I mean when you're talking a programme of 100 billion, Mark says that, this is at the top end a 2 billion range, so it's reasonably small in comparison to the wider programme, but it is, in terms of meeting Mark's ranges, it's critical. And I think the other thing, when I talked at the beginning about the assumptions that underpin this, one of the assumptions in Mark's ranges was that we would try to, for 2 years, to deliver at 360, and then we would need to revert to 320 anyway. And I think actually, from my perspective as SRO trying to manage the benefits, I want to be clear: are they real benefits or are they paper benefits? Yeah. And so actually testing that now and having that work that Mark has done is really important, and has helped us to make a decision on that now.
And to put some colour on it, at 360 you would have finished the railway, and it would then have been closed in order for a significant period of time in order to test the trains, because there's nowhere else in the world you could have tested them. At 320 we can test them on HS2, and that's a profound difference. The one thing I think we all want is that when he's finished building this railway and equipping it, we'd like it to open for passengers.
Good answer.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Steph.
Thank you. I think the stuff that Scott has just asked you is probably the single most important decision that's going to be made in the last 2 years. And I put it to you gently that every review of this project has cited scope change, particularly scope change due to politicians meddling about with the project, as one of the single biggest impacts on cost. Are you not in danger of just doing that again? Shouldn't we just get on with building the scheme that's been designed?
Well, I think contemplating the risk in the terms in which we've just been talking about it for the last 10 minutes or so, I think is a very responsible thing to do, frankly. The absence. What might we do differently? If 360 kph trains were common in the world, that might be one thing. That might be a change that we didn't need to make, because that would make the risk of running them here significantly less. If there were an automatic train operation solution for a high-speed railway anywhere in the world, we might not change that assumption, but there isn't. And I don't think the Secretary of State and I feel at all difficult in saying this is a project which has been in a pretty dire position. The taxpayer and passengers deserve to have it open. Why don't we take some decisions which not only reduce risk, take a marginal amount of cost out, don't make a lot of difference to the end result, but do ensure that he can deliver what we're now talking about.
And I feel as though the arguments for that decision make sense. I'm sure the arguments for previous scope changes weren't done on the basis of delusion. They were done with the right intention. Or were they?
That's a very interesting proposition, because Phase 2A was cancelled. Because you know where I was previously, it was certainly cancelled without consultation to anybody involved in the existing operating railway, despite the fact it had the most enormous consequences on the capacity of the West Coast Main Line north of Birmingham. As an example, having cancelled it, the train order was remained as it was. How could that be? And the answer is that you shouldn't willfully do things on a whim. You should work through a rational process, which is what we believe we've done in these latest changes.
That's fair enough. Sorry, Dean, come in.
I was just going to, because I think it's a really good challenge, because as somebody who's done lots of projects in government, you do not want to change scope halfway through. Yeah. I mean, it is the biggest way to lose control of time and cost. I think that's absolutely fair, and I think that is exactly the point that Mark was making as to why we're not messing with the civils at this point, because we're so far into that. That's exactly what would happen. Yeah. I think what we're saying here is this is an example of an issue we can see coming down the track that we can mitigate now, and so the scope change. It will require Mark to make a number of changes. So when we talk about Mark's baseline, there will be mentions of ATO all the way through that now need to be managed. That is not an easy process, and Mark will now need to manage that as part of the baseline. But on the what is, going back to the principles of delivering as cheaply as we can, as quickly as we can, what is the responsible decision actually in this space? It's we need to remove that risk from the programme so that we've got the best chance of Mark delivering in the ranges that he set.
And by the way, the proposition was advanced by him to us.
Well, that's going to be the next question.
Our proposition to him.
Yeah. So Mark asked the Secretary of State to ask him to look at what the impact would be of removing the highest peak of the high-speed element of this.
Oh no, the remit from the Secretary of State is for me to deliver it at the front end of these ranges. I suggested some topics that could come. One of these is this, but just for the avoidance of doubt, and I do understand the context of your question, I'm fully behind this. In fact, I'm the main prime mover of it because I just do not want to be in a position of inventing technology.
So let me be really clear, this is not political meddling in the scope. You welcome this, you think this is a sensible, achievable thing to do. The arguments, Lord Hendy, please forgive me for coming back to you. I'm not needling you just for any particular reason other than to come back on your previous explanation, which is that still doesn't discharge the case or the claim that the most reliable thing to do would be to stick to the design of the entire project as it is. That is the lowest risk way forwards, even if it means you come in at the top end of your budget range.
Well, the Secretary of State rightly has asked Mark to deliver this in the most certain manner, and we are trying to deliver it quickly because we need the capacity which the railway will give us. And I think it would be irresponsible not to contemplate things that give more certainty. What you can say out of this is that James Stewart had it to begin with. At the beginning of this project, there should have been far more contemplation about what was originally specified. It might have sounded brilliant to have the fastest high-speed railway in the world, but actually that should have been unpacked and to find out precisely what assumptions were being made about that in order to discover how deliverable it was.
We understand that, and I think you know we're not here to scrutinise you for decisions that were made prior to your tenure or even in the past. We've got plenty to scrutinise and discuss, I think, here. Yep. But what would you say, and I'm going to quote one of the pieces of evidence that we've heard, nothing is cheaper than freezing the design and building against a stable scope you spent billions and 2 decades developing. That still doesn't answer that question.
I would say there is a fundamental difference here that, in my professional opinion, I don't have a route to actually deliver it.
Right. Okay.
It's not like, we want a blue one or now we want a red one. If we were to continue, my advice is it's highly likely that I couldn't get there and I'd have to revert to a low spec anyway. So in a funny way, you are exactly right. The freeze we need now is a technical freeze. A freeze of development in the laboratories of our signalling manufacturers who literally don't know how to produce this. I think if we continued with this, we could achieve it, we couldn't achieve it. But if we want this railway open at the early part of these ranges and preserve all the benefits, this is the right technological choice. And it can only really be taken now before we strike the baseline. That's the other dynamic, that we haven't struck the baseline yet. So now is an optimum time to freeze. I do agree with you. It would be very wrong in 2 years' time to try and change the spec of the signalling system when we are in the middle of designing it. But we're actually at a very opportune moment to freeze the technological development horizon.
And I'll just go back very quickly to one thing, which is originally as conceived, this was a completely separate network of railways serving the country to the northeast and the northwest. At the stage at which it started to be pared back and it became obvious, or it became obvious to me at least, that actually this was going to be part of the national network, then those decisions should have been accompanied by a contemplation of what the technical effects of them were. And you know, the fact remains now, for the very foreseeable future, and certainly in my lifetime, these trains and what's equipped on them will spend more time on the national network than they will on HS2. If you don't contemplate that, you're fooling yourself that you've got this. You know, if you froze the spec without contemplating the use of the railway, you really are foolish.
I accept that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jacob.
Yeah, so we've spoken about speed, signalisation and technology. Just wondering if there's any other areas of over-complexity, to use Scott's phrase, the gold plating that could be removed as part of, or do you feel that you've addressed all of the challenges?
I think they are the big principal decisions that the SRO and the government would have to take. Interestingly, once you're on this path of more standard technology, it opens the opportunity at the working level to have standard componentry. Convergence with, for example, the maintenance specification of HS2 suddenly becomes highly compatible with what we're doing here. So in lots of ways, these are the big principal decisions. It opens the opportunity, though, at the very working level to standardise. So I think you will see the benefits of this rippling down. I can't quantify what that is, but in the baseline, we are going to spend the next 3 or 4 months rippling these decisions down, and it will reduce risk. Everything we're doing here is not additive. We're taking things away. We're taking effort away. We're taking uncertainty away. So it'll be at the working level, though. These are the big decisions, though, to pull, the big levers to pull.
And that standardisation, is that better for the supply chain and those companies that are supporting the delivery of the project?
Yeah. I mean, the supply chain is justifiably quite frustrated. We've got a very, very high local content from the United Kingdom. Many, many hundreds of SMEs supporting us. They're probably frustrated that we haven't been able to progress the project. This certainly opens I'll give you a great example, doors. We buy our doors from the Northwest, from Booth Industries. These standardizations make them have an easier path in their engineering. So they'll be to the market quicker. These are quite intangible, but very important to make sure that the supply chain can join our production as fast as they can. Try to eliminate all development. Standardization is the key. Yeah.
Thank you. Ollie, did you want to come in here?
Chair, not yet.
No, you're fine, okay. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am guesting today from the Public Accounts Committee, which, as you probably know, has been looking at the development of HS2 on many occasions over the last few years. Mr. Wild, you came before the committee in February last year, and we had an exchange at that time about contracts, and you were assuring the Public Accounts Committee that it would be relatively straightforward, I think, to renegotiate some of the contracts in order to drive out some cost savings. And in fact, you quoted on the Elizabeth line where this exact thing happened, as in renegotiation of contracts. I found the exact opposite, and this was in response to my question to you about how likely it was that contractors were going to be willing to negotiate. You said when the opportunity was created for people to be coherent, lower risk and productive, people really came to the party. Has that been your experience in the last 18 months on HS2?
Yes. I'll unpack it. I forgot I said that.
I brought the transcript with me just to be on the safe side.
No, I think it has actually. So in HS2, we have 4 Mainwork civil contractors. But we have other contracts as well. We have contracts for stations, contracts for the rolling stock, contracts for the systems. The real focus is in the 4 Mainwork civils. Because of this dynamic of they've got 3 or 4 years to complete their work, they're by far the biggest cost overrun that we've had. When we say we started without design, we're really talking about largely the Mainwork civils. So 4 Mainwork civils, the process of getting to a baseline requires that they stand behind it. That's an important principle. So in the autumn, I'm sure the SRO and the government, Treasury and NISTA, one of their key questions would be, is your new baseline backed off by the supply chain? I'm sure that would be a big question.
Yep.
So that requires that we do come to an accommodation. Precisely where we are, we're in discussions with all 4. I wish I could talk about them all individually, but that would be really inappropriate. We aim, though, between now and September to get as many of those in new contracts that we can, or revised contracts. It's going very well. All of them are leaning in at the CEO level and at the tactical level. Of course, it's a deal, so it's just not right I talk about it, but we're on the right trajectory to get revised contracts with all 4 Memwork Civils.
Can I just quickly ask, that quote of our exchange was actually February last year, February 2025, but you're still renegotiating? Why is it taking so long?
To be fair to the supply chain, first job from me to them was to drive productivity now, because while we're resetting, we're spending £7 billion of public money. We might come to this in the session, we've had a very, very productive year, very productive. So first thing I'd say is a big thank you to the thousands of people working for our Memwork civil contractors. They've had their best year. They've been safer and they've achieved about 20% more work for the same money. That was job one. And the reason we're in negotiations now with them is we have the ranges in the reference case. You really did need the announcement of yesterday by the Secretary of State. You needed that framework to tell the civil engineers that you need to finish your work in 2029. So that's why the opportunity is being created. We started conversations about 2 months ago, and we aim to conclude them in the autumn. At the moment, things are going positively, and certainly my objective is to get revised arrangements with them all. These aren't new contracts. What we're doing is shifting the balance of risk, which is too weighted towards the government at the moment. And in that rebalancing of risk, we're of course considering incentivisation, and that is the negotiation that's going on. All those deals will be subject to scrutiny, assurance, and they'll go through many layers, and they'll eventually end up with a ministerial task force. But I do stand behind that quote, and I've been very pleased. Whether we can actually get there with the right deals, because as a counterparty, I can't speak for them.
I'm still a little bit bemused, if I may, that you made that statement to me February last year, and you're saying that what's been required in order to achieve some of these savings has only just happened yesterday? I mean, why were you so confident last year that you were going to be able to renegotiate these contracts?
I would say a couple of things. It's always a 2-year process to reset. So my prime objective is April 27 to be in a coherent, controlled state. It was a surprise to me to find out we really didn't know as HS2 or the supply chain where we were, what we'd completed. In February, I really didn't know the extent of the gap between our knowledge of what we'd done and what we thought we'd done. In the summer of last year, with the joint ventures, I measured every bit of this job. Then we've put the project in the right order together. That creates the opportunity for the deals to be formed. If we tried to create deals without knowing where we were or the path forward, we would have simply ended up where, unfortunately, HS2 Limited was 2 years ago, of the supply chain unable to say what they were bidding against. So it's probably taken me about 3 or 4 months longer, but that has been a process of the scrutiny. But we know exactly where we are. We know exactly the dates they've got to achieve. We're in peak production. I'm very happy with our productivity, need to keep a focus on safety, and that creates the conditions of a conversation that's happening now about rebalancing the risk. I hope that's clear, but we've done it in a very sequential way.
So can you tell me, what have you successfully renegotiated so far, and can you put a number on the savings that you've made?
Can't, because this is the process of forming the baseline. If you ask me that question in April 27 with a new baseline schedule, I need to be saying that the new baseline schedule is fully backed off by the supply chain with revisions to their contracts. That's exactly the process we're doing now, and we need to have that done by the autumn, towards the end of the year.
So I suppose I'm still quite troubled by the fact, obviously we did ask you the question on the Public Accounts Committee in February last year. You said with great confidence that it was going to happen, and here we are, over a year later, and it's still with great confidence it is going to happen, and nothing has materialised in that.
Well,
in that
I would say
time.
My comments stand. In fact, I'm very confident. I will repeat though that I've always said this will take 2 years to reset HS2, and I'm sorry I can't do it faster, but I think the committee and the Public Accounts Committee would agree we only get the chance to reset this once, and it might feel like it's delayed, but it's the right thing to do this diligently, and I'm very confident that when we get to the new baseline, I will be reporting that we have done contractual amendments to bind the supply chain in. I'm very confident.
And can I quickly ask you, in these renegotiations, will you be encouraging your contractors to complete the project at the early and cheaper end of the current estimate? That's the goal.
Well, everybody understands that we need a fair deal, equitable, of course, for the shareholders of these private companies, but the prime objective is as low as possible cost at the right quality. And I go back to the question on this interesting handover to the system engineers. The most important thing in saving money is the civil engineers leave and the track people come in, and we don't have this endless cycle of rework that we experienced in Crossrail. We need a clean handover. So we might pay a little bit more in one area to have the certainty of reducing risk in another. And that's what the opportunity of the baseline, that trade-off, is one that we will explore in the baseline. And it's exactly the conversation we're having with the supply chain right now. The prize is demobilisation of civil engineering in 2028, 2029 to allow the access of the civil engineers. And that clarity is the thing that we didn't have a year ago when I made those words, but I've got it now.
And finally, for me, Chair, if you're successful, if you achieve the success that you're looking for in renegotiating the contracts, what impact do you think that's going to have in bringing down the overall budget?
Well, Dean might comment as well, because we speak about this a lot in our meetings. There is one big objective, and that is to incentivise our supply chain to complete this job earlier and value public money. Because how the contracts, and it's nobody's fault, how the contracts are arranged is they've become cost reimbursable. Now the quality of the work is good, the management is good, but we need the supply chain to bear down on costs, to have efficiency top of their mind, and that's the objective. Get to the early end of this ranges, bear down, value public money, and that's the difference, because the contracts we had really weren't structured like that. Dean, do you want to comment?
Yeah, well, I would say, so certainly the thing that I and my colleagues in government will be looking at when we come to assess these deals. You want two things, I think. At the moment, the risk to us is that there is a prolongation of work, that as work completes, suppliers reduce the level of resource. Mark needs what he calls his paper railway, which is hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper that certify the railway is ready. There is a massive value to be had in concertining and bringing that together. The risk to us at the moment is that becomes a very long tail. So there are two things that personally I am looking for, and I think, as Mark says, we met the chiefs of the joint ventures last week, and I think they are. I think it feels like they're in the same place, which is there is a big opportunity here for both sides where we get certainty over the price of the cost to go, i.e. the cost to finish the job, but that we're really clear that we also want their behaviour to be incentivised to get that paperwork to us as quickly as possible. So you want the price of the job and that to be set, and everybody agrees that is now the price of the job, but you also then want them incentivised to do it as quickly as possible. And those are the two things we'll be looking for. But as Mark says, that is not easy, and that is a long process that has been gone through. But from our perspective, the September point ahead of Mark's first baseline, I think, will be really important, because we want to then factor in that supplier-backed confidence into Mark's baseline.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. That's cost controls that you have power over. But what, in terms of external ones, one of your contractors has raised the concern of the rising cost of steel, and I think that's obviously going to be concern about the rising cost of fuel at the moment. So what assessment have you made of the impact of these external factors on the costs?
As I start in the programme, and I know, Deal, you've done a lot of work with government, so steel, I described before, the problems we had with Mariupol, and having at that point to get all of our steel from Portugal, the UK and Romania actually. So that was one of the big disruptions in the past 5 years has been the loss of Mariupol steel into HS2. The more positive news is we are really in the situation in this project where steel volumes are declining. The large steel production of rebar, structural steel for the civil engineering is in decline. Our rail, the rail track, will be UK rail coming from the Network Rail order, I think from Scunthorpe. So we're really talking about now structural steel for Curzon Street, Old Oak Common. We're really in the declining phase. So in lots of ways, the steel risk is probably less of a risk compared to broader inflation, fuel inflation. Fuel inflation might have a bigger effect on HS2 because we're in this declining steel. Still lots of steel to buy, but we're very much in the decline now. Dean Jonas?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we haven't said today is following on from the announcement of the ranges, there is no additional money being spent in this SR on the programme. So HS2 has its £25 billion, and that needs to be managed. It has provision for inflation within that, but it will need to be managed. And one of the challenges we will have if we see a significant uptick in inflation is, as we have with every project across the country, there will be a pressure and spending power reduces. We will need to manage that. Mark and I are managing that, and in fact we look at this every month as part of our performance board. So that will need to be watched closely, but we do have a provision to manage an amount of inflation.
Thank you. Right, moving on, Jacob. Yes.
Thank you. We've obviously spoken about construction, and you've said that from Old Oak Common to Curzon Street, that's expected to be complete by 2029 for the civils. I just wanted to ask, obviously, I'm close to Handsacre Junction, which I know my friend Dave Robertson, Minister, I'm sure has been on you about that.
Last night.
Yeah. I just wondered if you could confirm some of the timescales, if you know, around that junction specifically.
Well, Handsacre Junction to Delta Junction, or Delta Junction to Handsacre Junction, 30 kilometres of new high-speed track to the West Coast Main Line. We made a conscious decision in the spending review settlement that we would really focus resources on the Old Oak Common to Curzon Street and Delta Junction. Why is that? Because we need that bit of track to start the track laying, putting the track down, getting the train on the track. So we deferred the construction of Delta to Handsacre to be outside of this spending review period. So what we're doing is, and we spoke last night to some of your colleagues who are involved or in those areas, in the next 18 months we bring our works there to kind of a stable position. There is still more work to do there. We are working on the A38, the A5, but we'll bring that to a stable position, and then we will restart construction work in 2031-32. Now, you may say that's a big delay. It's a consequence of really allocating the resources to where they should be to get the railway open as fast as we can. But it also allows us to spend the time to take these speed and scope decisions into that bit of railway to see how we can minimise the cost. We haven't really completed the design, so it's an opportunity. So a delay, we won't start the actual construction work till after the spending review period, but it will provide the time to do it. We've taken on board, though, the very serious concerns about making sure that our works there are appropriate. We haven't got traffic management in place where we don't need it. We really respect the communities who have had quite a terrible time. You know, one of the worst affected communities have been in this area. So I really do take that responsibility seriously, and my commitment is to work with local constituencies as much as I can. And certainly if anybody has any concerns, to come to me directly, and I'll do my very best. But that's where we are.
And that, in fact, was the nature of the serious discussion last night, which is that we realised that taking these decisions does have a consequence for the communities who are affected by the building of the railway. And I would say politically as well as Mark that we're determined to minimise that as much as we can and to respect them probably more better than has been done in the past.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that there's a recognition of that, because my constituents travel on the A38 and it's been a complete nightmare. So I think it still is the plan to have the national speed limit put back in place by April. Is that still on track?
Yes, it is, and the work to be completed in October, as you know. Yeah.
The Secretary of State mentioned that construction productivity has actually increased across the project. What steps have you taken to improve that performance?
I would say credit to our supply chain. Even when I arrived, there was a positive change because the design, the fundamental problem of starting without design, of course, has been corrected. We have largely designed the mainwork civils. So when I arrived, there was already a positive spirit. What have I done? We've really focused in year to really relieve any blockages people have. Every month I meet personally the bosses of all the joint ventures, and we look directly with our chief engineer how much earth they've moved, how many viaduct segments they've put in, where they're blocked. So I think the big change we've made is really think about how we make the 30,000 people in Orange as productive as they can. We've had some good results. We have been helped by the weather. It was a very, very positive earthwork season, but it's more than that. I think it's about more scrutiny, and that's just not my scrutiny. Every month, Dean and I, we sit down and look at productivity as well, and it's the old adage of what gets measured gets managed. But we've seen some good results. The earthworks in particular have been quite astounding. We've moved 20 million cubic meters, more than 20 million cubic meters of earth in the year, achieved all the viaduct segments. I could go on forever and ever. All the tunnelling's complete between Alder Common and Birmingham. The joint ventures really do have the bit between their teeth. But I think the thing we've done is put the spotlight on it and drive people in year while we're resetting. And that seems to be a breakthrough.
And the Secretary of State and I are delighted that we've got somebody who is looking at this on a granular basis, because that's how you motivate the contractors and it's how you motivate the staff. You don't do it by some aerial view of this project. We need to see solid progress every day and every week and every month.
Steph, thanks. We're talking about stuff getting built. What's going to get built by the end of this year, do you think?
Well, there's a big milestone about to occur in the next few days, next couple of weeks, with pushing the huge Curzon 2 bridge over the railway in the late May bank holiday coming up and into June. So that's the type of visible symbol you've seen. Unfortunately, that might be the only really visible spectacular. Last year was the year of tunnelling breakthroughs, big pushes over the motorways. The thing you'll see this year is a lot more earthworks in the central area, a whole programme over the summer of very, very complicated pushing of bridges over motorways around the M6 and the M42. I've really got to give credit to National Highways. We're achieving things with National Highways that are usually lifetime achievements that we're achieving every single month, and that is another example of real close working within the government. So you'll see a lot of activity around Delta Junction and the motorways in the West Midlands. The big push, though, is a bit invisible. The thing we didn't achieve last year, we had a very good year except one area. We really didn't make as much progress as I thought we should have in the areas of design. Now, this is not the issue of drawings to engineers to build things. Dean alluded to the famous paper railway. These are the assurance documentations, the safety assessments, the risk assessments, the certificates that need to all come back. We didn't make as much progress last year as I wanted. This year is a really big push into the intangible thing that you can't see, the IT systems, the certificates. So you need to see a really big improvement in that. We've also commenced the tunnelling drive to Euston, and this time next year we'll be nearly done with the 2 tunnelling drives. Maybe it's not quite done, but I'm expecting we'll be done by May, June next year of the work that the government commissioned. You'll also see Curzon Street and Alder Common coming out of the ground. And particularly at Curzon Street, you'll see the superstructure emerging. So after years of looking at this very large hall in Birmingham as you pull in, you'll start to see the superstructure emerge.
This year?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the steel work will be erected during the summer, the substructure. And then you might even start to see the start of the roof this time next year. So things are really, hopefully I give confidence that there is really high productivity on site, which is essential, of course, as the ministers say, every single day we're pulling this window forward. That's the key. To think of this window of time that we've created, we fight for it every single day. Yeah. And every day you do something that could pull it forward. And the baseline gives you the opportunity to scrutinise that.
I don't think the committee got to Curzon Street. But
no, we didn't.
Now,
did we? No.
now, if you go, I was there last week actually, you can begin to see precisely what Mark says. It's starting to come out of the ground, and it is worth a visit, because in all these things, the size of what's being built is breathtaking.
Yeah. And just before we get back to building stuff and probably moving earth in particular, you mentioned, Mark, this sort of certification, documentation thing. Is that about the future systems, or is that about stuff that's affecting operations right now? Are there any risks, in other words, to the project as it stands? Health and safety risks, failure risks, because that particular work stream didn't make the progress you were hoping?
Yeah, so two channels really in that. The bit I'm talking about is the assurance of the certificated railway in the end. One change we've tried to make in this year is to think of this as a railway, not simply a civil engineering project. And to get to a railway, you've almost got to go to the future and work back. And it might be surprising to know that the certificates from the civil engineering, you know, the compliance certificates for the concrete, the certificate that they've got that handover from the National Highways Bridge, these are all part of the pyramid of documents that build up. And a mistake in Crossrail, big mistake in Crossrail was that was left at the very end, and we had to scramble, even had to redo testing of civil engineering that had been done because people hadn't coordinated it.
So these are commissioning things, they're not construction things?
No, they're related to construction.
Of course,
there's the assurance of things that were built. Did you build it in the right place? Did you get that certificate back? And the other channel you're talking about is the actual work on site. I'm really pleased with the trajectory we have on quality and safety. Never complacent, but we've made big inroads to improving safety on site, and again, much more to do there, but we're doing better, as I would say.
Well, Hendy, I don't want to underestimate the importance of what you've just described, the sort of visible impact of things actually rising out of the ground. You know, when the decision was taken to proceed rather than to cancel the whole project, you know, that's a decision that's been taken, and it's very important that the public can see and have pride in this new railway when it's built. Let's not underestimate, however, the challenge of getting to that place. I want to particularly ask you about the impact on the route. You know, I know Jacob's asked you about particular aspects of it, and you've given some reassurances. Are there any specific ways in which you're going to be able to provide greater reassurance to people along the route that are affected by this longer-term project trajectory?
So it's a very good question. I'm very bothered, and so is the Secretary of State, about the prolongation, significant prolongation of disruption to communities and individuals. And I'm also very bothered about some of the individual cases of landowners and property owners. And some of the individual ones which have been brought to my attention are, you can understand both people's anger and the really significant personal disruption that's been caused. So one of the things I've asked Mike Brown to do as the chair, he and I are due to have a meeting with the Residents Commissioner imminently, is to make sure that HS2 itself, and dealing with these individuals, actually takes both a proactive approach and a pragmatic approach to solving some of the difficulties. Now, inevitably with land and property, you've got both lawyers and quantity surveyors. My observation from afar, without pointing the finger at anybody in particular, is that some things have been endlessly, it seems to me, look like some of these discussions have been endlessly prolonged, which has made a lot of money for the lawyers and quantity surveyors, but hasn't left the landowners and the property owners and the residents in a good state. We are determined to do something about it. I've met a number of your colleagues from this house who've brought to me the worst examples. Mark has been proactive. The company's been proactive. I know that the board are now far more concerned than they were, because it is really important. There are some really distressing stories of people whose families and lives have been affected, and I think we have a responsibility to them to sort out their issues. Sometimes it needs to be done thoughtfully and not just legalistically. We've obviously got to be careful of public money, but we've also got to respect people's livelihoods and privacy. And I think the three of us all know of cases which actually, having been brought to the surface, we've tried to solve rapidly, and I intend to continue to pressurise him and the board to continue that, because we realise, there are many people on this line of route who believe that the railway would nearly be open by now, and sadly it isn't. So this disruption's gone on for years, and it will continue.
And clearly, aside from the potential for the reset to make it happen more quickly and more cost effectively, you've described stopping lawyers arguing and getting on with agreeing things. That's a material improvement, clearly. Are there any benefits in terms of the certainty of the scheduling of works that you think this reset will unveil? As in, will you be able to tell people more confidently it's going to happen in these 3 months but not these 3 months? And what's the next biggest risk in terms of delivery of those future milestones?
Well, I mean, the construction seasons and finishing the construction work in 2029 is really important, because you can't underestimate the effects of large earth-moving equipment and significant shifting of stuff on land. And there are a relatively large number of construction compounds which have to be there, not on the line of route, which can be released at a stage when the earth-moving's finished. So we are reliant on this whole process to give some more certainty to the communities and individuals affected by this. So I want him to do his best, not merely for the cost of the project, but also for the effects it has on the communities. When you get to equipping the line and systems, it will be a different issue. But we are reliant on that. That's one of the reasons to de-risk this as much as possible, to try and give some more certainty.
And Mark, biggest risks are skills shortages potentially going to drive a train through your plans?
No, because if you look at the other mega projects, Sizewell, Hinckley, we're largely deconflicted. There's not. Our earthworking will be finished before Sizewell has to start digging a lot. The risk we are sensitive to is electrical engineering, and making sure that when we start the fit out, the wiring, that we have enough skills, but we got the time. And the other advantage that it's a terrible advantage, because it's come through terrible cost of the taxpayer. This 2 or 3 years preparing to start systems we aim to use the best of, and prepare for getting the right electricians certified. Try to make sure that we do the electrical engineering once. We don't have rework cycles. So we're really going to put a lot of effort in the next 2 to 3 years to make the system engineering a good phase. But that is a risk, that we don't get the right quality of electrical engineering, either skills or rework, but we're on to that. But it's a risk.
But a huge benefit in using ECTS as a signalling system, because at least the supply community is used to that, and actually increasing it, the capability that Mark will need to equip the railway will at least be durable in its long-term ability to work on the rest of UK's railways.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I do hope the relationships with the communities along, and the importance of the relationship with the communities along the line is taken seriously and with more importance, because when I was on Transport Committee before and we made a visit to Buckinghamshire, I was shocked at what councillors, parish councillors, landowners and residents were telling me about the attitude of HS2. I've not heard the same level of complaints from colleagues since. Obviously it's disruptive, but it sounds to me, I'm hoping that the quality, the priority to the quality of the communication and honesty is better. I do hope that it's better than it was before.
Well, I hope so too. One of the things that reassured me in discussion with some of the people whose constituencies are affected last night is that they knew that Mark was coming himself to visit, which is really important, and that produces a scale of urgency in his organisation, which is helpful. I found that before in similar jobs. You say you're going to go, he says he's going to go. Things are more certain because of that, and I will encourage him to do it. That's why every one of your colleagues who's written to me, I have taken the opportunity to meet personally rather than.
And they're very grateful of that.
And I think that's the right thing to do, because we must respect people's lives and livelihoods.
Thank you, and it's good to hear. Lawrence,
thank you very much, Chair. I just want to take us back for a moment to contracts and oversight. Mr. Wild, when you appeared before us in July last year, you said that there was a fallback if negotiations could not be concluded, and that, and I quote, in areas where we have a little bit more flexibility to reallocate work, we will do that, but for the majority it will simply be managing the contracts in a much more assertive and firm manner. I mean, why wasn't that happening before?
Well, I can't. You wouldn't expect me to speak for my predecessors. I can tell you what I found, and I found that the frontline teams of HS2 were under-resourced. That's just a statistic. When I arrived, only 60% of the frontline teams of HS2 they were only resourced as 60%, so it was 40% vacancies. Now that was clearly an unacceptable position. Too many people in HS2 in central roles, not enough people on the ground. And of course that does go to the chair's point in the Minister about communities, because ultimately the communities need leadership as well. So we filled those roles. We still have a few vacancies, but not very many. We've put some really exceptional leadership in place for our civil engineering. I'm really, really pleased with my team in the Mainwork Civils area. All I can say to you is I know the value that, the most important people in this job are the men and women in orange digging holes. And my job is to make them as productive as they possibly can be. And we're trying to shift the whole balance in HS2 to have less people in the centre, more people in the productive activity. And we've had a good year. Much more to do in communities. Actually, I think we have made a big progress in communities. I still want more. But in terms of production, and if we ended up with a no-deal scenario with these Mainwork Civils, those activities you said are exactly the path we would go on, and we have contingency plans for that. Much better, though, that if we have a constructive, balanced partnership with our supply chain. So that's very much our plan B.
And we've heard, and I've heard privately from some people who've been engaged on the project, that one reason for high vacancy rates, high turnover rates, was culture, that people were prevented or felt that they could not escalate and report problems. Do you accept that characterisation?
I really just can't talk about the past. I can only say what I've done. I certainly did find an organisation of great people that was quite fearful, and it is true, there was opacity to what the actual situation was. What I've tried to do is, like we did on Crossrail, is create the environment where people can speak truth to power, where they can be transparent and not feel that there would be any kind of sanction. Because what you really want in these mega projects is all the voices to tell you where you are and create the environment where people can solve problems together. I don't think we're remotely where I expect us to be in a year's time, but I hope we're on the right trajectory. I do want to underline, though, that the folks in HS2 are great people, and I'm very pleased. What we need, though, is more of a culture of production, transparency, leaning into these ranges. These ranges announced yesterday by the Secretary of State are a real big breakthrough for me to drive the organisation to the early part of these.
I mean, if I may, I'd just say that Secretary of State and I are expecting the chair and the board to lean into this too. Actually, I think you can see in big projects sometimes that the people at the top of it become advocates for the thing in general, rather than delivering the project that they're being asked to supervise in particular. And I know from my interactions with Mike Brown and his new board members that they're very focused on this too, and that's right, actually. They're the leaders of this, to whom Mark must report on a daily basis, and they have to drive that culture as well.
I do think there's also a role for the sponsor, and I know when I go back to that issue at the beginning about the importance of integration, part of the role of a responsible sponsor is to be able to get that sense of how does the organisation feel, and not just have it come from the senior executives. And so that point about being integrated at the top in the kind of working level and at the very bottom is really important, and I think that is what we're committed to doing.
And finally, on transparency, HS2 Limited only had a limited audit opinion for the 2024-2025 accounts. At the October meeting of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, and again a quote, members discussed the objective to create an improvement plan to enable HS2 to achieve a moderate audit opinion by April 2026. Was that achieved?
We are yet to receive the GIA's opinion, so I don't know is the answer. I do know that I meet the GIA every single month, and we're on a positive trajectory. One of our really big objectives in April 27 is not only to have a baseline schedule with the right commercial deals, we also need to be in a control environment that's moderate. So it's one of our big objectives, but we'll wait and see what the GIA say.
Okay, thank you. Right, now moving to a place that some of us know fairly well, Euston Station. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. So if we can imagine, we've fast forwarded into the future a bit. The train line's all being built, and people are arriving at Euston Station. There's more houses all around, and there's shops, and it's become a popular place, and it's really busy. Are you confident in your passenger forecasts and any forecasts for footfall to make sure that on day one, when people start arriving, that it's not already at capacity at the station, and are the plans future-proofed?
I'm happy to say that the planning that we are doing fundamentally factors in the demand for stations. One of the reasons we need to do the upgrades to the underground station because that is already suffering from capacity issues. So the work that will be done now on Euston will factor in the expected demand over its life. What I would say is it's really important to sequence that properly. And so one of the things is, if you remember, Euston is the HS2 station, it's the underground station, the conventional station, and the development that goes around it. One of the risks, of course, is it's important to take a campus approach so it's coordinated, but you can't do everything at once, and so sequencing in the right order is really important. And so what we will make sure is over the planning period that we will now enter, we would do that sequencing really carefully, but we start in principle with the HS2 station and that underground station, and as I say, demand, we work very closely with TfL on that, and fundamentally using their demand modelling. That is what we're doing.
And look, I should say I've got some history in this because I chaired the Euston Partnership for 7 years. We went through a series of designs for HS2 which proved to be far too expensive and therefore undeliverable. There is now a real agreement amongst the parties that there is a spatial plan. There have to have been some compromises to achieve that, which is good progress. So we can be a lot more confident than we were. You do have to also remember that there was a considerable hiatus because the last government decided not to go to Euston unless the proposition, broadly speaking, was that it didn't cost any public money, which was a challenge beyond which anybody could achieve. So there was a hiatus, but I think we're in a much better position now, though I would say, and it will come out of the subsequent discussion no doubt, that the cost estimates are in a less developed place than the rest of HS2.
And are the 6 platforms for the new bit of the station enough?
Yes. Yes, so they are. So the 6 stations are sufficient for up to when we talk about the 10 trains per hour from Euston over Handsacre Junction. The additional platforms are so that we are not preventing the ability to run more trains to the north in the future, and that is the principal use of those additional platforms. So they are provisioned for, but they won't be operational.
And there have been some reports in the media that the 3 extra might be sort of hemmed in by retail space and not be long enough. Do you have any views on that?
I've got no evidence to suggest that it's not long enough. What I would say is there's an important issue of meanwhile use, and so if you do have additional space, you will want to make sure you can make the most of that space. But my expectation is those three platforms will be able to service the station in due course.
I think we're in a very good place. There was an attempt by some elements of the previous government to to make the design incapable of having more than 6 platforms, which would have been the wrong thing to do, because we know that the capacity of the line, both north of Euston, could be up to 16 trains an hour, and it is the right thing to do in the public interest to safeguard the space so that in future times there will be the terminal capacity to operate to the full level of service that what he's building is capable of operating.
Thank you. So the Euston Delivery Company has now been established, and in November Camden Council announced their intention to lead a development corporation as well. So thinking first about the Euston Delivery Company, what will it be responsible for, and what will remain the decision and the responsibility of ministers?
So, the purpose of the delivery company is acting with the authority of the Secretary of State to do 2 things for us. So the first is it will be the guardian of the plan for the kind of design for Euston, and then the schedule and the budget. So its job is to bring partners together to do that. In doing that, it needs to be a genuinely integrating organisation, not just another voice amongst many. So the way we are doing that is there are 3, if you like, layers of governance, and I feel like I'm talking a lot about integration this morning, but it's really important. We're bringing people together at the strategic level, so that's the politicians in Camden, GLA, government, and chaired by the Rail Minister, and senior people from key partners in that Euston partnership. On the EDC board, that will be brought together with non-executive directors from all of those partners, nominated by those partners, as well as some independent NEDs. And then at the working level, the company will bring together those partners again at the working level to make sure that throughout the whole structure, from for design, on money, on strategic issues, we are all aligned. And that's really, really important, because we've got to be honest, we've had 2 goes at getting this right. We haven't done it yet. This time we need to make that work. And it starts with getting the governance right. So the EDC is the, if you like, the embodiment of the will of those partners, not just another player in the space. And that's the principle that we're driving here. What I would say is we're really pleased that David Goldstone, who has lots of experience in many ways, not just as Officer of Value for Money, but also in his time as Chief Executive of London Legacy, following 2012, has agreed to be a lead non-executive director as we start to set that up. So actually what we're trying to do is embed real expertise from people who have had those really important integrating functions and roles before, built in from the start. We'll be advertising for a chief executive for that organisation very soon, and I think that will be a really important step in making that organisation to start to build the capability that it needs.
And it's really important that people are close, because actually we have, as I said, there are some inevitable compromises about delivering this, and we've got to bind those compromises in so that the individual partners don't revert to, this is what I want and we can't go forward without me getting it in total. It's a complex thing to do. The sequencing is complex. The site is obviously limited. So we've got to bind that together in this.
An early example of that being positive, I'd say, would be the spatial plan that's been agreed, where there was a demand for more than a third space than we actually have on the site, and yet I think we had about 35 workshops that ensured that we got to an agreed consensus on the spatial plan.
And I mean, you've just listed a whole range of stakeholders, and to be fair, when we talk to them at the moment, they say, you know, there's good collaborative working. But this is a long-term project. Some of those personalities will change, possibly some of those organisations may change as well. How are you making sure that there is the will to drive this through, and it isn't kind of left to the whim of people getting on with each other?
And I think that for me, but for me, that strategic group, that's why it's so important, because you need to bind in the kind of political buy-in to that. So as I say, the Rail Minister chairs that group, but the GLA and Camden sit on it at a political level, as well as the chairs and chief executives of those partner organisations. So that won't meet, it probably meet 3 times a year, but its job is to create that strategic alignment and to make sure that the will to do the job and finish the job is there from the start.
And what we've got to remember is that there's a huge prize here. This is the biggest development site in central London. It's capable of creating enormous economic wealth and commercial space for jobs and housing. And actually that's one of the jobs at top level, which is to remind people not only are you building a terminal station which has to have sufficient capacity to do its job as a railway terminus, but you're also master planning a really significant space. And I think that, you know, the experience that I've had so far suggests that actually at top level, if you bring the right people together, they do recognise that. It's crucially important both for the Mayor and Camden that Euston gets developed properly and it creates the jobs and homes that are so badly needed. But it's also important at a national level that it creates the growth that a site like that in central London can achieve. And I, you know, when I'm compos mentis, I always try and remind people during those meetings, both in the partnership and as we go into the future, that has to be the overall aim. It's not just a railway station. That's got to be successful. It's got to be built right. It's got to have the capacity. But this overall immense prize of economic growth and jobs and homes there is
okay.
Right.
Sorry, I'm just conscious of time and brief answers. Carry on, Alex.
Thank you. What's the time scale for completing the works at Euston Station? And by station, I mean old, new, underground bus.
So,
yeah, them too.
Yeah, the if you like, public timetable at the moment is the one that we've set out in the reset ranges, and that's the one we're committed to, which is at the moment getting services from Euston to Birmingham and across Handacre, and that's between 2040 and 2043. What we have not yet done, and we are not yet mature enough, as the Minister says, we're still working through the plans, is all of the what is the completion date for all the elements of that plan. So at the moment, when the ranges we've talked about at the moment are for services from the new HS2 station to Birmingham and beyond.
Does that mean that passengers who use the traditional Euston station at the moment need to wait till 2040 for it not to feel grotty anymore?
Well, there's a lot of effort has gone into managing Euston better in the past 2 to 3 years, and I think most of its users, they wouldn't say it was lovely, but it's certainly managed more collaboratively. Network Rail is investing in the station in order to keep it fit and serviceable. One of the things that needs to be done, which is a feature that wasn't there in several of the previous designs, is to have one concourse for both stations, which in the end will be a huge benefit. If you turn up there for a train to Birmingham, you should have the same experience as a train to Bushy on Oxley. Shouldn't be very different. It will require a hell of a lot of management to keep the existing station going, and one of the reasons for binding Network Rail and the train operators into the delivery company is that they have to keep this thing going, as do London Underground, whilst all this work is done around them. I think it's no mean feat, but the timescale means that ought to be achievable.
And then finally, on paying for it all, ministers have stated the ambition to use private finance for the work. Do you have any backup plans if that doesn't come through?
Yeah, so the plan at the moment is Euston, as the Minister said, is an incredible investment opportunity. We're looking at private investment in 3 parts. So the first is the potential for a private finance deal to fund the HS2 station. We're looking at the possibility of tax increment finance to recognise the uplift in land values from development, and that's a conversation with Treasury and MHCLG. We're also looking at the opportunity for development receipts, working with Lendlease, who's our developer, our contracted developer. And so there are 3 areas where we're looking to maximise private investment. We don't yet know the extent, how much will come in through those 3 routes. Those are the 3 we are exploring. What we have done in Mark's ranges, though, is given, if you like, a order of magnitude number, which has been assured, but it's an order of magnitude number for the station and for the underground. But as we move through, we will want to build that budget. But I think one of the lessons we are trying to learn, and this is one that came out in the Office of Value for Money, is that you should not try and set a budget too early, and actually you should give projects, if you like, incremental funding through the design and set the budget at the point where you're about to enter construction. And I think that is the principle we want to adopt here.
And given that funding is going to be coming from different streams, and we're using private finance for the new station, we don't seem to be using it to upgrade the old station, and yet we're also being told that we're thinking about it utterly holistically and it will feel like one station at the end. Is there any inherent risk in the fact that the funding streams are coming from different places, and therefore we wouldn't have a sort of cohesive approach to actually doing those works?
My starting point is that most projects of significant scale will have a number of funding streams, and they need to be managed, but they can be managed and they can be sequenced. And one of the reasons for having the EDC and having that dedicated guiding role is to help us manage that process and sequence it in the right way. So my sense is it's right that we look to reduce the burden on the taxpayer. That is what we're doing. Yep. But we will make sure that we build the necessary management capability in to the EDC so that we can manage that across the lifetime of the project.
And it is a particular reason why we need the partners to be kept close all the way through this work.
And just on Euston, London Centric this morning has released, is saying, based on TfL documents that they've come across, that TfL has raised concerns about the risk of severe overcrowding at Euston unless a very significant capacity increase can be made in terms of circulation space. So notwithstanding a new concourse area for the two stations, the revised plans are essentially the existing Euston station and a new HS2 station next door. And how much additional capacity will be built in to ensure that overall circulation between underground and the rail elements are going to be there. Are TfL's staff's concerns should they be taken seriously, or has time moved on since those documents?
I read that over my toast this morning.
Yeah, okay.
Notably, all of the diagrams are from last autumn.
Right.
And there has to be, and part of the process of getting to an agreed spatial plan is to test out what people really need. The capacity that's needed in the tube station, finally, will be the capacity that's needed when HS2 is up and running fully. And one of the questions that we've been discussing over the months, particularly with TfL and LU, is to what degree the station needs to be expanded now, and to what degree it needs to be expanded in the final. So
is there a collective ambition to significantly increase circulation space for all passengers, whichever mode they
It's inadequate
transfer?
now.
It is.
And we know that.
Well, exactly.
So the debate that you see carried out by some quite effective journalism on the internet is about it's not about, there's no question that the tube station needs to be expanded. The question which we need to answer both for cost and delivery purposes is how much does it need expanding and when, and what provision can you make to finish that job later, because we don't want to spend a penny now that we don't have to if we can, bear in mind the complete capacity of HS2 is going to be into the 2040s.
Thank you. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions now about the implications of the cancellation of the Phase 2 leg of HS2 to Crewe and Manchester. So, Minister, you'll be aware there's been lots of discussion in the rail press about concerns that HS2's order for 54 200-metre trains, which is equivalent to 8 coaches, could reduce capacity north of Birmingham, given the lack of that HS2 Phase 2 leg. What is your view on that analysis?
So the first thing to say, as I said earlier, was that it's very significant that the train order was not altered in any way on the cancellation of Phase 2A. I think the next thing I'd say is that one of the issues that I know that Mark is intimately concerned with, because we've been discussing it, is what is the right order for rolling stock for this railway at its various points into the future. And that's a complex subject on which I defer to him, simply because a contract was let with 2 suppliers on which literally hundreds of jobs will depend. And I think one of the unfortunate effects of some of the speculation is he has to do this work with them, just as he has to do with the main works suppliers, in order that he's both got rolling stock for the day one of the railway which will operate, and also rolling stock which will be suitable for the configuration of the railway, both on day one and whenever it gets extended north of Handsacre and when it gets to Euston. It's a very complex job. I don't think it starts from an easy place, and the Secretary of State and I want to give him the time and the space with those contractors to work out what the right answer is.
Yeah, we have a contract with Hitachi and Alstom for 54 200-metre trains. Contract was placed in 2021, and that's the contract we have. We are well into design. This year, actually, one of our big objectives this year is to complete what's called the preliminary design. It's gone pretty well, actually, but many challenges, particularly with the technological changes we've made. So the first thing I'd say is we are, that's a contract we're in, and we are actively managing that contract. The question then becomes, with the baseline schedule that will emerge in the autumn, what train fleet do we need across the whole life of this programme? And that quickly starts to involve the wider rail network that Dean might want to speak to. But for me, for clarity now, I know there's a lot of speculation in the press, we're managing the contract we've got now. And obviously the train is one of the most fundamental things to get the baseline right, but it has got dynamics in the broader rail network that Dean will comment on. It's important that we just get this right, because the train will obviously endure way beyond the programme, and it bumps into, as Minister said, the train we're using now will travel more times on the conventional railway than it was before. Long way around the same, from my point of view, we're dealing with the contract we have, but we fit into a bigger picture, and Dean's coordinating work there.
Yeah, and I think I'd say no changes have been made to that contract. I know there's some speculation that we're about to make a big change. We're not about to make a big change in that sense. We do recognise that there are concerns around capacity. All I can say at this point is we are not anticipating a reduction in capacity, that's for sure, as part of our planning, but we do need to recognise we need a rolling stock that can perform on the conventional railway for as long as it's going to now, as it does on the captured network, as we call it, between Euston and Curzon Street. So we'll need to present options to ministers on how we manage that most effectively, but we are not about to make an imminent decision, which I think has been widely speculated.
Colleagues are going to ask some questions about the future of the West Coast Main Line in terms of north of Handsacre, how to accommodate traffic given the cancellation of HS2 Phase 2. But just a quick question for perhaps the Minister, or whoever's best placed to answer it. We're constantly being told that the West Coast Main Line is full, there is no capacity, and yet 110 mile an hour trains are being allowed to run without tilt capability, not just Lumo, but also with Avanti. And of course, we've heard this week Spark for Transport has decided to cut the timetable in the summer for 4 weeks. How can the two things be true? That the West Coast Main Line is full, and yet at the same time we're introducing slower trains that consume more capacity, and we're cutting the summer timetable because there's too much capacity.
So let's get the summer timetable out of the way. It's a perfectly reasonable proposition to reduce in the short term train services when there's less demand for them, and I don't think that's a relevant discussion for the long term. The question that you might ask, and which I do ask, is why the rest of the railway network doesn't reduce services, because you don't want to run empty trains or you don't want to run more empty trains at times when there isn't demand. But put that to one side. The situation that you're describing is one that's occurred because the railway has not been managed on a holistic basis. And one of the things that we are now starting to do, and I'm very pleased that Network Rail and for that matter DFTO are starting to get involved with Mark Moore, is to contemplate how HS2 fits into the wider railway network for the longer term. It's really important that we use all of the railway capacity in Britain in the best way, and the only way of doing that is not to contemplate HS2 on its own, but to see what best it can do for the rest of the network. I don't exclude contemplating what speed should be achieved on the existing West Coast Main Line. When the current franchise ends, it gives an opportunity for GBR, as it will be, to contemplate holistically how you manage the West Coast Main Line with HS2 to produce the best train service.
Okay, all right. I'm now going to hand over the chair to Steph Aquaroni, and we'll carry on with questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elsie.
Lawrence,
Oh, feel free. Happy to, thank you. What do you want to go?
yeah, I certainly can. So the cancellation of the northern leg of HS2 by the previous government was obviously seen as a missed opportunity by many across the northwest. What are your plans and timescales for disposing of the land across the Phase 2 route?
So the government's decision was to keep, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Was to keep the land which had already been acquired north of Handsacre because we need to take decisions in the longer term about what's done about capacity north of Handsacre to Crewe and now to Millington. You'll be aware that the piece north of Millington is the bill which will be restarted in Parliament, which will be part of Northern Powerhouse Rail. We do need to contemplate seriously what the capacity needs are in the future, how much railway needs to be built, what pinch points need to be relieved, and frankly we need to do it in slower time than the stuff that we've just spent 2 hours on this morning, and we need to do it properly, and we will do it properly. I think GBR will help because it enables a holistic, as I was just saying to your colleague, it enables a holistic view of railway capacity and the services that operate on it. I don't think that a conclusion on that is at all imminent. We know we need to do it, and in the meantime, of course, we need to manage the land and the effect on the communities.
I would say on that land between Birmingham and Crewe, we have said obviously we will keep the land that we have bought, but we will give back the temporary land and we will remediate that, and the plan is that we will complete that by the end of 2027 for that temporary land.
The high-speed rail Crewe to Manchester bill remains dormant and a bill committee hasn't been appointed yet. Does the government intend to appoint a bill committee, and if so, when?
It does, because that part of it, which is Manchester to Millington, is part of Northern Powerhouse Rail. So our intention is to get that going. I believe that discussions about getting the committee appointed are in train as we speak. So I'm expecting to, it was in the King's Speech, as you know, and I'm expecting to see it reappear for that part of it, which is Manchester to Millington.
Okay, is it possible to provide a bit more detail on when we might see the appointment of the committee? Good civil service terms, imminent. I'm not using seasons. We need to get, it was in the King's Speech for a purpose, which is that we need to reactivate it in order to get that part of the projected new line between Liverpool and Manchester going. So I expect to see some movement shortly. Thank you.
Jacob, do you still want to come in here?
Yes, so I did just want to touch on the human impact of the decision around Phase 2A, because I've got Bagshaws in my constituency who are a chartered surveyor that are supporting particularly agricultural landowners around the Phase 2A route, and we've heard from several local farmers and landowners who feel really uncertain about what this means for the future of their land, particularly as some of them can't access it, they don't know whether they're able to build on it, and they don't know what the plan is for the long term. So what are you hoping to do to help with that long-term thinking and giving people some certainty over their land?
Well, I'm very clear that we've got two objectives which you could see as conflicting. One is to make the right decisions about the long-term future of what railways need to be built north of Handsacre, and the other is to look after landowners, property owners and residents and communities along that line of route. I think we can do better on the second, even though the work that will be related to the first will take a bit of time to achieve.
Yeah. Especially in relation to land that's held on a temporary basis, and frankly getting on and getting that done as quickly as possible. And I think that is now we've got that certainty, we can do that. I think there's about 60 sites where we're holding temporary land. I think there's about 4 that have already been transferred back, but we've now got the opportunity to do that as quickly as possible.
I can understand the need to have protections in place for a potential future railway, but there is quite a lot of safeguarded land that potentially could be used for agricultural use over the next 20 years or so. Is that something that you're actively exploring now?
We're very anxious not to, I can't think of the right word, anaesthetise land which could be used for, because this is a long-term prospect. The government, I think, has already said that it doesn't see that building a railway of any sort like that will be imminent in any sense. So we need to effectively manage this land for the best use of the land and for the communities around it. And I'm, I'd say the same as I said to the chair when she was there about the management of the communities and individuals affected by the phase 1 works, which is that we need to do our best for those communities as well.
And I think in the vast majority of cases, my understanding is that land is being leased back where we've taken it. I think the other thing is looking at where we've got rental properties as well, that they are not left empty as well, and that's something HS2 are looking at too.
Thank you. I'm keen to move on to two important topics, Birmingham and industrial relations, but just very briefly, Scott, did you want to come in here?
Mine's is a more general question, actually. So just it really links back to the points that Sarah was making earlier about the contract, and I think Mark was saying through no one's fault we've ended up with a reimbursement style of operation on the project. And I think, Dean, you were saying that you were hopeful that you would get the contracts to a place where people are sharing some of the risk on cost and time overruns. But I'm pretty sure in a previous appearance before the committee, I forget who it was, but I think it was probably either Lord Hendy or Mark made the point that those discussions were taking place then as well. But I just want to get clear in my mind how important it is that we get those contracts to where the contractors are sharing some of the risk in terms of being able to beat 2039. Because it seems to me to be quite an important factor that they're not sharing the risk.
It's one of the most fundamental root causes of where we are. The reason it's there goes back to that root cause of starting without design. And to be fair to the supply chain, it's simply they couldn't price the risk. Yep. Now you fast forward to where we are now, we know much more about the scheme. We've got a emerging based on schedule, the design's mostly complete. The supply chain are in the business of taking risk and to be incentivised. So I'm very confident that we will adjust the risk balance. Of course, we're never going to be in a situation where we can put all the risk back with the supply chain. Wouldn't be appropriate. Equally, us owning all of the risk isn't appropriate either. So I think the real story is we're in a situation now where we know so much more about this project, the route to the end, the amount of design that's done, and I'm sure we'll come to an accommodation.
But I think the question I asked previously was that now that the project started, we're not really in a good negotiation position, are we? That's the challenge.
And
it isn't, as you said, it's really important if we're going to beat 2039.
We certainly haven't got the leverage that we would have at the beginning of a project. By letting the contracts that are entirely normal contracts, legally let, being administered correctly, clearly when you're trying to in-flight change it, you haven't got the same leverage. But I would say this, all of these supply chain partners all work for the UK government. They all want to do a good job. And we work extensively across government, supported by ministers, to make sure that we leverage all of that influence. And talking directly to all of our supply chain, they generally want to do a good job. This project is a benchmark, and in a lot of ways, when it's successful, which it will be, they will sell it as a success. So yes, we might not have the leverage we have when we're placing a contract, but I believe because of the strategic supply chain we have, we will come to an accommodation of rebalancing the risk for everybody's benefit.
Hope so. Thank you, Steph.
Not at all. Lawrence.
Thank you, Steph. And just taking us back to the West Coast Main Line north of Birmingham, the Secretary of State said yesterday that we will conduct a further feasibility study on connectivity north of Birmingham that will consider all options. What's the timeline for the feasibility study? Has it started? When can we expect to see it? And what do all the options mean?
I think from my perspective, the study's in its early phase. It will probably take a couple of years. The expectation is that it would cover a range of options, not just a rail line, but actually what other options on kind of smaller infrastructure scale can you do to improve services. So the starting point will be conversations with local authorities along the route to make sure we understand their kind of perspective. So my expectation is it will take a couple of years. It won't be short, but the important thing is to get the full range of options available for improving services, not just an assumption around the line itself. I want to give you more detail, but that is basically where we are.
And as I said, I'm very keen indeed that it's informed by a holistic view of the use of the infrastructure on the National Railway Network, because one of the weaknesses of the whole HS2 project from the start was its conception as being something completely different and not connected with the national network. Once we got GBR looking at both the train service and owning the infrastructure, there's a real opportunity for the railway itself to have a long-term view about what infrastructure is needed in order to run the right levels of service in the future.
I think some of my constituents will find it remarkable that we're talking about 2 years for a feasibility study, not for an investment decision, but a study, and at the end of it we might not even get a new relief line. Are you balancing the well-known problems of trying to upgrade the West Coast Main Line? Just think back to 25 years ago when that project was an extreme failure, because I think a lot of people, including more widely in the city, were under the expectation that there would be a new line of some sort, if not necessarily to the HS2 specifications.
Look, from my perspective, I think it's a really good challenge. The study is not the be-all and end-all, actually. I know that colleagues at Network Rail and others are looking at what are the short-term opportunities to improve services along the line, whether that's timetabling or where services stop. So yes, there is ongoing work there. It's not just all on the provision of a new line. There is how do you make and optimise the existing line that we've got. So that is going on. They're not mutually exclusive.
And you're right to reflect. You're right to reflect the long-term history, which was the failed attempt to upgrade the West Coast Main Line. But I think it's also right now to look at, the one thing that we're very clear about at government is that you don't automatically revert to the high-speed railway as a consequence of needing additional capacity, that you revisit all of the options, and particularly the geographic options about where the pinch points are and how much new capacity you need. But we also might as well inform ourselves about both the consequences of having the phase one when it opens, and also the market for travel between London, the Midlands and North Western Scotland as it appears now, because it would be pretty crazy not to look at it in the light of 2026 rather than 2001.
I mean, I think this is a topic we'll probably return to, and the Secretary of State did say a new connection between Birmingham and Manchester in the House yesterday, but I wanted to move on because I'm conscious of time to industrial relations. Last year we spoke about the initial framework agreement from 2016, and the clue was in the name, but 10 years on we're still working to that agreement. That document said that there would be a commitment from HS2 Limited to ensure access by trade unions as an integral part of all subsequent work package agreements, so before the civil contracts were signed, and also a commitment by HS2 Limited and its suppliers that the latter will recognise and apply relevant national agreements. Would you accept that those commitments were not in fact written into the contracts?
Yeah, I would. First of all, let's just acknowledge the, as I say, 30,000 people working on this job, and how much actually the success of this job is their productivity and safety. And they're all paying their taxes, and we've got to just acknowledge that a productive workforce is obviously our objective. I think the framework agreement in 2016 was actually quite a breakthrough at the time. You think about it now, though, and actually in that time, for the biggest endeavour this country's ever completed in the construction activity, we've had a relatively harmonious relationship in the industrial relations field. You know, the joint ventures manage the industrial relations, which I think is an important principle, because they are at the front line employing the people that we use. So we've got to keep that principle. I like the framework agreement. I think it's time to refresh it though. And we've started conversations with the TUC. I aim to meet the General Secretary soon to think about, well, what is the next step? And I think the civil engineering just needs to be brought to a conclusion. And of course we have to respect the safety, all of the things that we've embodied in the framework agreement. The prize really to think about is the system engineering that will start from 3 or 4 years' time onwards, which will endure for a long time. So my commitment is to speak to the General Secretary and sit down and talk about what could we add to this framework agreement to make sure that it, when we start the systems engineering, we can have a successful completion of the project. But I do accept, before my time, clearly the intent of the framework, some of the things haven't really come through. I don't accept that. Yeah.
So you're looking at the moment at contract variations on those main work civils contracts, and I accept that some of those contracts are more advanced in terms of completion than others, but is variation to enshrine those commitments in the contracts within the scope of those discussions?
As you say, at least one of these is nearly finished, so it wouldn't be worth doing it. I'll take that away and consider that. We're right in the middle of these negotiations. I'll take that away and consider that. It's not my primary objective. My primary objective with the civil engineering is to get the best deal for the taxpayer and get the job done over the next 2 to 3 years. What I will take away, though, firmly, is, and it's been on my mind, is to speak to the General Secretary and think about the framework agreement with him in the context of what's happened. So I will certainly consider it in the Memwork Civils, but it isn't the primary objective of those negotiations.
I mean, on value for money, I'm not sure where the additional cost will come from, if I may gently challenge you on that point. And I put it to you that had the commitment to ensure that the national agreements were followed across subcontractors as well as the main contractors, then some of the well-advertised problems with some of the subcontractors, such as the Danny Sullivan Group, would not have occurred in the first place.
Look, let me take it away. As you know, we have some of the best agreements here. We insist on PAYE people. We have all the best intent. We're very happy actually with our joint ventures, how they administer their contracts. Let me take that away. But because they're live live negotiations, I don't want to talk individually about them, but I promise you I'll take it away. In the systems rollout, though, it's firmly on my agenda to sit down with the General Secretary and think about a 10-year agreement. What is the next step? Yeah.
Thank you. And my understanding is that best practice on other projects, such as Hinkley Point C, is that the sponsoring body, in this case would be HS2 Limited, does conduct regular audits of compliance with those national agreements amongst the prime contractors and subcontractors. At Hinkley Point, I believe it takes place every 6 weeks. Is that an example of good practice that you'd also be willing to look at?
And many others. So Hinkley is an interesting exemplar peer project that Hinkley's kind of getting through its system engineering. There are many lessons. I have a session coming up actually with Hinkley on this very, very topic. So again, let me take that away. There is a huge opportunity that before we start system deployment in 2029 onwards, we get this right. And certainly that framework agreement, there are many opportunities there to improve it. And I will consider what you've said in the civil engineering.
Thank you, appreciate that. And Chair, I should have declared also my membership of the GMB and Unite Trade Unions at the start of that discussion, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. That actually brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you all for coming. We look forward to continuing our scrutiny of HS2 into the future. Do feel free to write to us. If there's anything you haven't been able to cover in your answers this morning, we're grateful for the commitments to look into things that you've just made, Mark. And that concludes today's meeting.